Welcome once again to the Naftiko Capabilities podcast. My name is Ken Lane. I'm the Chief Community Officer for Naftiko, but you might also know me as the API Evangelist, talking about APIs, integration, and anything to do with the interfaces that we use to power our world. Getting the hang of these conversations, having more of them, reaching out to new and interesting people. The format still working for me. I hope it's working for you. Taking these conversations and I'm grabbing just the different slices and themes and topics across them and stitching them together into 15-minute episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. So coming out of the last episode, which we talked about microservices with Mike Amundsen and Sam Newman, I wanted to focus this one a little bit more on artificial intelligence. And I had some interesting conversations with Sam when it comes to what's the impact that AI is having on enterprise organizations.
It's taken the oxygen out of the room. So it's very difficult for anybody to be doing anything in their architecture, in their systems that's large scale, that isn't somehow related to AI. So, and a lot of, I think developers are being painted as being negative around their use of AI. In my experience, that's not true. They're quite positive actually about like using these tools to help write the code, for example. They're more negative about being told they have to put AI in the products and not working that out how to do that. So, but what I mean by taking the oxygen out of the room is like, you can't be doing anything unless it's AI. You can't be investing anywhere unless it's AI related in these organizations. And so a lot of people are doing exactly what I would do in this situation, which is by saying, there's some stuff we need to get done. We'll say it's AI, right? You're smuggling initiatives through. There's also kind of just the general problem around AI, which is we don't fully really understand the architectural impact of that. And, the things like the security models and the data models and, principle of least privilege, for example, becomes incredibly important when you start looking at like some of the agentic workflows. But fundamentally, organizations are still looking for valid business cases for these AI use cases, right? So that's the underpinning all of this. It's like everyone's going, we've got to do it, but don't know kind of what. So I think it's kind of interesting right now, but it's like that's where the energy sort of has to go, because there is no energy for anything else. With my publicly traded companies, right, it's the stock market expects you to be doing stuff. So literally, I had a big client I've been working with for a few years and doing some re-architecting, and they said we're going all in on AI, and what that means is they're not doing anything else isn't AI. And it's like all the stuff I was doing with them would have made that easier. They can't do it because it's like this is how it's going now. So I mean that will change, right? Because as the economics around the pricing of these things starts to look more realistic, as we start to realize there's no ROI on the current crop of products we're putting out, those things will stabilize. But the benefit of being older is that I can take a kind of a longer view on a lot of these things, which is it's chaos right now. It's not going to fundamentally change the world anywhere near as quick as people think. There's a lot of noise, a lot of chaos. But it's a case of just keeping your head in these situations while everyone else around them is losing theirs. So, I would also say that some of my clients I'm working with are dealing with it really well. Like there was one of my favorite clients I work with in the US. And they're about the nicest banking adjacent, lovely client I've ever worked with. Right? They work with like small banks and mutuals in the US. So the mum and pop style small bit banks and building societies and things. And their sort of head of tech, he's effectively a CTO. He said when I was AI stuff, I was thinking about how to deal with this, and I've just realized I don't know what's going to happen. But what I want to make sure is that my developers focus on what they can really do as humans. So his mantra is, I want them to be more human. So he's like doubling down on the things that his developers can do that is about being more human. That's never going to go away. And it was just a lovely way of approaching it, which is there's always chaos going on. But like what I can hold on to is how can my developers be better humans? Getting them to be more engaged with the product, getting them to talk to clients more, and there's windows where that even amongst all that noise and all that stress, where a calm head is it's still a wonderful thing.
Definitely. Having a calm head in today's market is super critical. But that's what I really love about what Sam's approach. He's looking at it from the human side, trying to understand, how teams are working, how organizations are working, and really kind of coming at it from the most important piece, the humans and our relationships and how we work or don't work. So I really appreciate his approach. It's conversations like these what makes me feel better about what's going on when it comes to AI, and that we're going to be all right. The teams are going to be cool. We're going to figure out a way through this, and we're going to get to the other side. But I asked him, I wanted to know, is AI, the intention behind AI, is it that we're supposed to control the AI and augment us? And, that's what he alluded to in what he was saying. Or is AI, controlling us, and kind of removing the agency that we have in our day-to-day work?
Yeah, and the smart people around AI, that they understand that human in the loop is still really important. Like if you look at sort of the way people, I think the more smart people think about software development with AI, for example, is you're treating AI like a very eager intern who has no idea what good looks like, and you're going from writing all the code yourself to now effectively managing something that writes code for you. Right? There's an acceptance; it's not always going to be correct. And I think that's the problem with that is how we actually, to be fundamentally, it's around the interaction design, around our use of AI in that context, right? The fact that those early chat interfaces, which are in some ways the least interesting part of the AI stuff, really, the fact that they speak with such authority leads us to believe certain things about what they're saying, and that affects things quite fundamentally. I've definitely seen like examples of human not in the loop stuff, which I think kind of spot on, right? Really clever. Like it's a really almost like a dull business case, but it's like a concrete example of like a business case here. I saw was a talk that I saw from the Financial Times at Lead Dev in Berlin earlier this year, and they were doing something quite simple, which is when a user says they're going to not, so what subscription package should we offer people who might want to sign up for the Financial Times, and if we're leaving, what subscription package should we offer them? And they basically just created a model, and they tuned it and trained it and tuned it and trained it, and we're able to show that this model now actually could do much better. It would retain more people, and they'd make more money out of it. And people, and it was just, that was like, okay, that's just good use cases, right? And it took a lot of time and effort and energy. There's the human in the loop there is in the training and the continual training of the model, right? And the tweaking of it and observing the outputs. But in the moment of it making decisions, it's making pretty good decisions, right? And you can actually see outcomes. I mean, you can see retention increasing. You can see, I think that they found, that the total value of each subscriber went down a bit, but they got way more subscribers, so it more than netted out. Like, that's kind of interesting stuff, but like we don't think of that. A lot of people think, oh, it's going to be a chatbot interface or something. It's like, all you're doing is just servicing the worst parts of this to the public. You're exposing yourself to all kinds of problems, and it's easy. That's why people are doing it, right? They can quickly just expose, a chat interface and think their job's done. It's like, no, you've actually just massively exposed this horrendous user interface to your customers, and you're expecting them to be happy with the situation. So I think it's, as always, the technology runs ahead of us understanding how to use it, and we're absolutely in that space here.
I definitely feel like the technology is getting out of hand and getting away from us. I kind of feel like that's by design. There's some folks who intentionally like that obfuscation, that complexity, and there's money to be made in that. But I don't think that's AI's got the exclusive monopoly on that. APIs, other platform approaches have been doing that for a while. But one way that we kind of work with and tame that madness and get more control of it is by reducing the size and the complexity of it and work with it in smaller bits, and then have things work together So while I had the man himself on the line, I wanted to ask, what's the future of AI, and does it reflect, breaking that down into smaller chunks and smaller language models being something that's going to have an impact moving forward?
I think in the current moment, it probably makes more sense. I mean, let's look at the macroeconomic picture, right? None of these, there's no financial business model around any of the big AI companies. Their investment case requires them to be making, I think, what's around 2 trillion. The AI space needs to be making 2 trillion a year by 2030, which is 5 times the current entire software subscription space. So even if they find that money, who's paying it? Because that's got to come from you and me. I haven't got that money. So there's that. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is either these companies are going to go bust, or what's going to happen? I mean, we know at the moment they're subsidized. They're also massively subsidized. So the price we're actually paying for these models is massively subsidized. So even if you get a product into market, how are you going to work out your ROI when you don't know how much you're going to be charged for these models in the future? So for me, it already makes sense to be looking at the use of smaller models as part of a workflow. So things more like LangChain, for example, or variations thereof, because in that situation, you can keep the problem space smaller. It makes it much easier for you to mix and match your models and also your vendors. So you're less exposed to the risk of a vendor going bust or their prices jacking up. And also, we've seen situations where those models started degrading in behavior. So if you've broken, rather than having, my problem is this big open single vendor based solution where something goes wrong, I'm screwed, break it down to smaller pieces. You can address those individually. You can start, to repatriate some of those models in situations where you can run them on your own infrastructure, right? Maybe you start running your own TPUs or whatever. But equally, what I've found is when talking to people, they broke it down and they realized, oh, this thing we've just worked out after a while what it does. We just replace that with our own code and it's better. But so for me, that model makes sense like now, because that's a model that actually helps me deal with the potential uncertainty going forward. It makes it easier to understand what's going on. It allows me to mix vendors, to mix models, and to reduce my overall exposure and to reduce my overall risk. You're not going to just get there by some kind of top-down vibe-coded monstrosity necessarily, but I think that makes sense now, right? Let alone in the future. And then the question is how you kind of tie all that stuff together is the tricky part.
This sounds like the similar kind of ownership, accountability, right sizing that we've been working on in other pieces of our infrastructure. This is just the next generation of that, right?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, it's modularization, right? I mean, this is what I'm going to do. The reason I'm a bit jet lagged, I was doing his classes, awesome classes in Thailand and Japan with people out there, and it's like I was saying to them, it's like there's nothing new in microservices. It's all old ideas. It's just a modular architecture. Modules come from the late early 1970s. Mm-hmm. We've been looking at breaking down big problems into lots of smaller problems that are easier to manage and easier to deal with and easier to think about for decades. Why would we treat? But every single time we have a new bit of technology comes along, those same ideas still make sense. So for me, this idea of things like LangChain, for example, it's more about thinking in more of a modular concept, right? And it's just here, it's even easier to justify because of that uncertainty around the wider vendor space, right? We don't actually know what's going to happen to all of this stuff where we're building things on top of. And most organizations can't afford or justify doing it all themselves on their own kit because the outlays are just way too high. So for the moment, I think for me, it's about risk management. It also happens to just follow good, sensible modular programming concepts as well. And again, that's still the bedrock of how we've been structuring programs for decades now.
I love how this always comes back to fundamentals and just the basics of object-oriented computing, modular system design, and it's not just about microservices or AI. It's about the foundational building blocks of how we develop software. And so as I was having other conversations with folks, I sat down with Simon Wardley, and we talked about a lot of different things. But of course, AI came up, and I wanted to revisit some of the same old concepts, but this time from a business perspective. And I asked Simon about when we were reminded that sold cloud in the early days, that cloud was going to be cheaper. It was going to be cheaper, more efficient. And you hear echoes of that with AI. So I wanted to get Simon's view on this and how things are.
Okay. Oh, there's so many different things to unpack here. In terms of, but we'll stick with the, we'll go with the myths one because you've opened that door. So one of the things back in the early days of cloud. So I used maps to map out the environment. I could see how practices were changing. I was running strategy for a company called Canonical. They provide Ubuntu. So we use the maps to work out where to invest and where to target. So when I first arrived at Canonical, people were like, what are you here for? To bring you into the cloud. This was 2008. And a lot of people were like, well, that's just a fad. No, it's not. And use the maps to explain why and where we would target. And we spent, about... $500,000, 18 months. We went from 3% of the operating system to about 70% of all cloud. So we managed to really take the space because we knew where to target. It's a bit like territorial maps. You can use the landscape as a force multiplier. Okay. So one of the things that you learn with maps is there are numerous repeating patterns. And so the most basic are what I call climatic patterns. They're like the economic rules of the game. Everything evolves. You will have inertia. There will be co-evolution of practice. And then you get these other patterns, which are universally useful principles called doctrine, and then gameplay. Now, if I just stick with the climatic patterns, you get rules like Jevons paradox. So William Stanley Jevons was, he wrote a paper called The Coal Question. I've actually got a copy on behind me. And what happened is they made steam engines more efficient. And because they made steam engines more efficient, and this was back in the 1870s, something like that, it was a long time ago, people thought, well, use less coal. And in fact, coal went up. And the coal went up because we made steam engines more efficient. We found new uses for steam engines. So in the very early days of cloud, people would come along to me and say, oh, cloud's going to reduce our IT budget. Not a chance, because you're competing against others. Okay. We've already established that cloud was a shift of product to utility. So yes, it's about efficiency, but it will create new practices, which will give you speed, and new things, which will give you new sources of value. And you're in competition with others. Now, you might think, you adopt cloud and nobody will take advantage, create new stuff. Sure, then you'll save money. But what will happen is one of your competitors will go, oh, look, we've got extra resource. We can do some of these new things, new value. Now your customers are looking at your company going, oh, but they give that. You don't. So now you're under pressure to give these new services as well. So what happens is the amount of stuff you do goes through the roof. So people would say to me, cloud was going to reduce IT budgets. I said, no, you're going to end up doing more. And the next thing they'd say, oh, we can get rid of our sysadmins. It was just like, oh, God, here we go. All right. So we had 2,000 physical servers, large enterprise, 2008. And I would say that's going up to somewhere, probably maybe 50,000 virtual machines. And people would go, oh, that's just nonsense. Now, today, that's not nonsense. Okay. But back then it was like, oh, total nonsense. You're going up to 50,000, much more complicated, much more, and in some respects complex environment, but more complicated. And you're going to have to somehow manage that. You're going to need just as many sysadmins, but with different skill sets, slightly altered. And so what happened is a whole bunch of execs tried to get rid of their sysadmins, and then they hired them back as DevOps engineers or SREs. It just means sysadmin with a different skill set. So the first thing is you don't save money. Second, you don't get rid of people. The third one is because you're building higher order systems and it's getting ever more complicated, the amount of energy that you're going to use is going to go up continuously. And you can see with progress over time. I did this for the Royal Society back in 2013, demonstrated this. So you end up using more energy. So the claims are always, the other claim is just for startups. I remember it was clearing the air on cloud. And one of the big consultancy firms wrote this in 2009, that it was just for startups. No, of course it never was. And that's known as the Red Queen effect, because you're competing, it just takes one other enterprise to adopt and you have to. So what you get are usual myths just for startups. Get rid of people. We're going to save money. It's going to cost us less energy. And that's just generally nonsense. So we're in the large language model, GPT space. I don't like the word AI because AI is a massive field. And mostly when people talk about AI, they actually mean large language model GPTs. There are lots of other parts to AI which are useful. But this is the bit which everybody gets excited about. Yes, your software engineers are going to be using it for coding, but your code base for a large enterprise is going from 30 million to probably 1 billion lines of code. Just purely Red Queen effect in competition with others, the amount of new features you're going to produce. So you're going to need software engineers using large language models, GPTs, just to keep up with the total, the complexity and the complicatedness of what our systems are going to become. Yes, we've had a whole bunch of execs saying we're getting rid of software engineers, like Klarna saying we're getting rid of people. Klarna, of course, are now rapidly hiring them back. So yes, software engineers are gone. We're going to have people called agentic herders, AI wranglers, and humans AI integrators, or so. Software engineers with some other skill sets. Okay, but we just will pretend that they're not software engineers. Energy consumption is going up through the roof. Perfectly normal. IT budget, you're not going to save a penny. You're just going to end up doing more stuff. So it's no different.
Yeah, if you've been in this business for any amount of time, over 5 years, you're going to have experienced these different cycles, and you're going to see how common themes come back. And people believe them, and people believe that these things are going to be cheaper. The economics are going to change, the type of work's going to change, things are going to shift. But a lot of, I hope that's the one theme out of what Sam talked about and what Simon talked about is this. I know it feels new, but all of this isn't new. There's some new elements, but most of it's just being recycled. And there's a lot of money to be made in confusing people and keeping people thinking and believing in the hype. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Definitely enjoyed talking with Sam and Simon. Got more material from them. So this is just a small tasting of the conversation we've had. You can look forward to more from both of them in the future. But thanks for joining, and I'll see you guys all next time. Wait, hold on 1 second. I got one more thing I want to talk to you about. I want to talk more about Naftiko signals, the market research I'm doing to gather signals from the companies we're talking to, as well as targeting as part of our early revenue and sales strategy. And I'm gathering all of the signals I can from blog posts, press releases, and job posts from about 60 to 70 enterprise customers right now, and looking for signals of what technology they're investing in and what services they're using. And the top 2 technologies across them that are most common and most invested in from these signals I'm gathering are artificial intelligence is number 1. That makes a lot of sense. But also EDI, so electronic data interchange, so very old technology, which really shows me that companies are struggling with their leading edge technology, but also their trailing technology and whatever's the oldest tool in their toolbox. And so I think that's an interesting signal. Looking for other companies to talk to. If you have any questions or want to learn more, feel free to just email me directly, kinlane@naftiko.io. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky as well. All right, thanks.